Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andriy Shevchenko, and on behalf of the team of Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform, I want to thank all the journalists who tell the world about our fight for freedom. This time we will be talking about the Forum for Preservation of Cultural Heritage, which ended today. It had the official named war in Ukraine, the battle for the culture, and we expect to hear more about this forum from Ihor Poshyvailo, Director General at the National Memorial Complex of Heroes of the Heavenly Hundred. So, Mr. Ihor, please. Good afternoon. Really, today the forum ended. Really, it was the Forum for Security of Cultural Heritage. It was named War in Ukraine, the Battle for the Culture. And why it was named so? Because from the beginning of the full-scale aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine, Ukraine suffered catastrophic losses of cultural heritage. And it's not only about the historical buildings destroyed by Russian bombs, rockets and missiles, but we're talking about the brutally pillaged museum collections which were stolen by Russian occupiers in Kherson, Melitopol and other places in Ukraine. And there is also significant loss of human resources because a lot of representatives of cultural sphere were internally displaced or were forced to live outside Ukraine. And we were facing the need to meet in some platform which would unite the efforts not only representatives of Ukrainian cultural front, but also of the world community, which started helping Ukrainians very actively to protect their cultural identity and historical memory. And now we see that there is a cultural coalition which was established from the very first days of war. And my colleagues were called from abroad, and the representatives of foreign institutions and organizations and cultural institutions or other persons involved in the work and culture field, they were calling and asking how can we help you to preserve the cultural heritage. And it was clear back then that Putin's regime attacks Ukraine not only because of a territory or natural resources, not due to some political ambitions, but because the culture became the target. The cultural identity of Ukrainians was an obstacle for recreation of Soviet Union and all those processes established by Ukraine after Maidan's, the decommunization, decolonization, and now derussification. They pose existential threat to Putin's regime, and this is exactly why this forum proposed to open the to create the informal platform for representatives on non-government sector and government sector as well, to make sure we're on the same page, that we're at the same point. I would like to invite to the microphone Kateryna Goncharova, who is an expert of Ukrainian heritage, who represents the World Monuments Fund. Miss Kateryna, from what you've heard within these 2 days of forum, which are the most sensitive points? Yes, thank you for this invitation. I want to thank the organizers for this forum. I'm the employee of the World Monuments Fund, and I'm the specialist in cultural heritage of Ukraine. And the reaction to preservation of cultural heritage in Ukraine. It's in the DNA of this organization. We were active in all the sensitive points, in all the sensitive spots where crisis emerged in the world. And when the war started in Ukraine, the fund was able to accumulate the funds to provide operational help in Ukraine. So we're happy that we can get involved in the programs for preservation of cultural heritage in Ukraine, and we can assist to the experts in this field. And it was my honor to moderate the working group for conservation, stabilization, and renewal, and everything related to architectural restoration and work with architectural heritage. There is a lot of problems in the field in general because the area of architectural restoration was in crisis even before the war. Now all these problems just deteriorated, and in educational aspects and architectural field itself is not segregated, it's not specified. I'm talking about the specifications for certifications for the restoration architects, their ability to do the specialized works of preservation in the monuments now that everybody expects for the post-war renewal. I have to also mention that a lot of specialists currently left or ended up in the ranks of armed forces. So the people who can make this specialized restoration as real experts, they are in very little numbers. There are no laboratories, in fact, for historical building materials for the laboratory analysis. We even face the problem when the implementation of international standards in the area of preservation, stabilization, and restoration. We're now understanding that we don't have common platform, common standards. There is no common dictionary, common vocabulary. There is a need for development of educational programs which would in a number of ways cover different target audiences. The educational programs for students, the training courses for the owners of the historic monuments, for the courses for administrators and government employees. So there's a number of solutions to some problems, to some issues that were brought up during the work of this forum. Kateryna Chuieva, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. From what was discussed in that forum, what can be the practical use? What's the use that the state of Ukraine can make use of? The Ministry of Culture and Information Policy got actively involved from the introductory word of Minister of Culture Alexander Tkachenko, and on the level of deputy ministers, we were taking part in both moderation and discussions during the forum. What should we understand? We should maintain the regular, transparent communication with all the communities which work on preservation of cultural heritage in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. From the very beginning, from the 24th of February 2022, this communication was happening in a number of ways. It was hundreds of Zoom meetings and Skype meetings in all possible formats with Ukrainian and international Ukrainian specialists and Ukrainian businesses, international partners, donors. So it's a very complex communication on a lot of levels, which allows us to accumulate the most information possible about what's going on there on spots and how our colleagues see the processes happening in Ukraine and how are they perceived abroad and how we should preserve and protect on one hand and then to plan the restoration on the other hand. And that forum, and some people here are the direct initiators of that forum. So I'm talking specifically about Ihor Poshyvailo. So we were meeting under the head of UNESCO, but the Ukrainian community didn't have a lot of opportunities to meet earlier and to discuss those sensitive questions. So the forum was an opportunity to inventory the issues, to document them for ourselves, and to search for solutions, to look for solutions on the level of organizations, initiatives, civil society, and in what way the government should be involved in the uncovered sections of that work, because it's sometimes it's only government who can do some things, and some things can only be done or can be done more efficiently by civil society. So we should create the ecosystem for recreation, restoration of cultural heritage. So this ecosystem is now being built, and forum is one big within these 12 months. It was the first time that we gathered like this, and there were the representatives of institutions who support Ukraine, the representatives of donors. They support us directly and methodologically. They provide assistance to the museums. They help us document the loss of cultural heritage. They will provide us with their feedback as well. So that will be a complex vision which will allow us to build the strategy to move along the roadmap, which would allow us to preserve certain vector during the war. If we have any questions on the floor, please go ahead. Good afternoon, Ksenia Dvornikova. My question is to all the participants of the briefing. Within this year, 2022, which was very difficult for Ukrainian cultural heritage in general, the forum let you summarize it. In your opinion, the year 2023, now that the war is still going on, how will it be different, and what will be the main challenges we will be facing, and what are the issues which are not so urgent as they were during the beginning of the full-scale aggression? Thank you. Well, my colleagues will compliment me. I would like to hear all the discussions that were going on. Physically, there was no such opportunity because some discussions were going on in parallel. At the same time, they were happening in different working groups of the forum. But what I'm seeing within the last month of the work, from what we were able to discuss during these 2 days, there are different types of challenges. Part of them is related to the fact that we were unable to do something within the previous couple of decades, and now we have to integrate those challenges into our current programs, and we have to react to them. I'm talking about the issues related to compliance with international conventions, the old dream for creation of a specialized units in the armed forces of Ukraine to react better to the protection and preservation of the cultural heritage, like archives, museums, and so on, in the areas of active warfare where civilians don't have access to. So those are the practical issues we have to solve right now during war, and I think that is something that's pushing us to development of some these solutions and to their implementation. And there is a number of practical challenges. It's almost the year that the war is going on, and unfortunately we will spend the year 2023 with them too, and those challenges, they did not go anywhere. We understand that the front line may change at any moment. No one can cancel any risks of future offensives, and those regions which were not prepared to crisis situations, they have to undergo such preparation right now. We work on that, and at the same time we work on prevention. It's a very difficult task under current conditions, so we have to take into account the risks related to secondary losses, as during some activities, for example, we move some museum collections, or we don't make it restoring some facilities, some venues, and it only increases the threats. So there are complex risks that we have to work with. If you may add something regarding the comparison of the challenges posed by 2022 to 2023. So the cultural field was shocked by this brutal attack. It was trying to rear its head. We were trying to discuss the situation about those problems that we inherited from previous periods. So this year, now that we learned our lessons, we armed the museums with the necessary equipment and materials. Our field became more stable and more resilient to the new threats now. On the other hand, another threat which appears this year is that the occupied territories, they require more prompt reaction in terms of preservation of cultural heritage and non-material cultural heritage as well, intangible cultural heritage. And talking about 2022, the war gave us the opportunity, ironically saying. We now see different realities, internal realities, external realities. All the world is ready to help us now. All those problems that we were accumulating during decades, we can solve them right now. We have to create infrastructure. We have to create the strategy. We have to create the quick reaction system to emergencies, like to establish those CIMIC units, and it's a great field to work on. And the year 2022 should be the year of momentum, of a decisive step forward. If you have anything to add, well, it's a very complicated question. I can talk on behalf of the fund. In the beginning of the war, there was everything was very entangled. We were in this fog of war where coordination and tactical steps required a lot of effort. But at the same time, everybody emphasizes that in Ukraine, after Maidan, the rebuilding of civil society was very efficient, and the speed of reaction of civil initiatives is impressive, and it's something unique for Ukraine. Our bottom initiatives, our non-government institutions turned out to be very quick to react, very efficient partners. Do you see any new changes? Well, the new challenges. Well, the new challenges are that everybody gets tired, but the scale of help and the structure of help, it's being crystallized. Everybody starts understanding where to move, how to move, and the government starts articulating their needs in a more clear manner. And the people in museums, they understand, for example, what they can get.
Media, are you getting proper? Go ahead.
For me?
Any one of you. Are you getting proper outside support for the tracking of what we call blood antiquities, the trafficking of stolen culture that is hitting the black market outside? Because there are people who are experts in this field. I was covering a lot of them when it came to ISIS and Syria and Iraq. Are you getting that support, number one? And then the second, are you also getting support from outside technologies for LiDAR technology and digital imaging that will help you?
Can you explain the last question?
I know that there are some people who use various digital technologies like LiDAR, which is laser detection for especially architecture and statues, etc. I just want to make sure that if you need that support, that the world knows. And if you're already using that support, it might help affirm to people who are interested.
Дякую за запитання. Ми розділимо тут відповідь з Ігорем. Насправді обидва.
Well, really, both blocks of problems that you were asking about, they are in work. At the moment, we understand that we have to document the damages inflicted on the cultural heritage, and we understand that we could use some measures to prevent the illegal trafficking of cultural values, and there is very intense communication with different organizations under the umbrella of UNESCO mostly, and under the umbrella of European Commission and other bodies of European Union and all possible government committees and civil organization, Comos and Com. But talking about the risks of illegal trafficking and pillaging, obviously, Ukraine, through the ministries which are entitled to such work, including our ministry and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, communicates actively with the governments of different countries all the risks and all the threats of such illegal trafficking. And it's related to a certain extent to the cultural presence of Russia and the risk of legitimization or appropriation of cultural heritage of Ukraine. All those risks are being voiced, including they're voiced publicly during the meetings of Security Councils of United Nations, and we work on the registers of the lost values. This information is not yet public, but the work is in progress, and the governments of other countries help us to develop those registers. And on the other hand, such organizations as our law enforcement agencies and Interpol are interested in the maximum efficient exchange of technologies. As to the digital technologies, starting from satellite images to 3D scanning of values, well, Igor will give you more detail on that. Well, it's a very actual question, and I would like to say that SHEICOM, the International Council of Museums, they developed red lists for Ukraine. It's an instrument for the auctions for Interpol to identify the illegally trafficked values from Ukraine. On the other hand, there is a Smithsonian Culture Rescue Initiative. From the very first days of war, they started monitoring the situation in the occupied territories, which was not accessible to Ukrainian government representatives. They documented those crimes, and Richard Kurin, who was taking part in our forum, he just yesterday was telling us as they were watching Russians live steal the cultural values from occupied Kherson, and all that information is provided to Ukraine, so Ukraine can be represented then in international tribunal. Many foreign colleagues provided information, and there is a separate area of work in Ministry of Culture for digital transformation as the digitalization of cultural values, and we create platforms that have digital materials that could help us track the illegally trafficked cultural values or restore the damaged historical monuments. Well, Ukrinform, I would like to ask if there is information on the number of cultural values stolen by Russians from occupied territories, and do I understand it correct that there is already a list in place that you offer to international partners, the list of values stolen, so that they could be further on tracked and returned to Ukraine eventually? Well, there is actually a number of questions embedded in one question. So we have to have understanding of how those lists are put together. There should be conditions for safe and secure work when the territories are liberated, specifically those which were occupied for a long period of time. We're facing a number of challenges, including the illegal trafficking of values. They're stealing from museum. You may know that Russians presented it as evacuation of cultural values, and they proclaimed themselves as the saviors, rescuers of those cultural values. So it's a juxtaposition of notions, and in this case, no one puts together any cultural values like coins or weapons in the same car. All those processes are documented. The paperwork was also stolen from Kherson museums, so that the Ukrainian side could not reconcile the documents with the with actually stolen values. So the museum workers don't have the holistic information, but we have some part of that information which does not unfortunately compensate in full the number of stolen values. In case of Kherson, the works are underway. So in this case, we're talking about tens of thousands of items. We will be able to give you the exact number in 2 months the earlier. And unfortunately, not all of those items were photographed, but as soon as those documents are officially promulgated, they will be given to Ukrainian side. So the works are underway. The numbers of cultural values stolen from occupied territories which are not yet liberated, unfortunately, we don't have the access to the primary source of information, so it's way more difficult to track the movement of such cultural values. And there is also the problem of pillaging of cultural objects. I mean, the archaeological values and the areas of warfare, they are high-risk areas where those values cannot be protected, and we will be able to see the scale of this catastrophe only after the war is over. Ihor Poshyvailo, Kateryna Chuieva, Kateryna Goncharova. We were talking about the battle for the culture. We invite all the journalists to follow our announcements and stand with Ukraine.